video, we're going to be talking about COVID-19, trauma, self-care. We're going to cover all three topics. And the reason I want to focus this video on that is because I know that lately we've been pushing a lot. And when I say we, I mean mental health professionals. We've been pushing a lot like self-care, and we've been just really putting that out there, putting it in the forefront. And it's something that we need at any point in our lives. We need to be making sure that we're finding things that we enjoy, that we're taking the time to take care of our mind, our bodies, our health, our spirituality, all of that, right? But now we've been pushing it even more because this pandemic that we're experiencing is something that is changing our lives. And it's something that has so many components of trauma and grief just embedded into it. And that's why we keep pushing self-care. I don't know about you, but I have no idea how to handle this pandemic. I didn't know what it was going to look like when it first began, and I had no idea that it was going to look like what it looks like now. And the thing about it is that I think that's the way we all feel. And I don't think that we're having enough honest conversations, that we're all trying to figure it out. And this pandemic, it's something that's ongoing. I mean, it started for us really impacting, our way of living probably around mid-March, when we really started experiencing it here. Just having to make sure that we were social distancing and all of those things, right? But the thing is that it's been impacting like our world for a really long time, and for months now. And it's not something that is going to end anytime soon. And so that's what makes this experience unique, that it's an ongoing thing, that it's invaded every part of our lives. We're not working from home. We are doing everything different. The way that we interact with each other, the way that we shop for groceries, the way that we work, the way that, everything functions around us is completely different now. And the thing is that we jumped into that life change without stopping. It's been go, go, go. We haven't had time to like stop and reflect because we're in the middle of it. And so all of that together is a lot for us to carry. And so it's been something that has really changed the way that we do life. And I think that part of that is what is traumatic within itself, that there's these life changes that we didn't ask for, that we had to just kind of roll with. I mean, even like our social life, right? Like what our weekends look like now as opposed to what they looked like before. Like it looks completely different. And so that to me can be very traumatic. It can be traumatic to be hearing these stories of all the things that are happening around the world, that are happening in New York, that are happening here, that are impacting people. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. So I want to jump in and just kind of give you I was trying to go back to really finding a good definition for trauma, because my hope is that as we talk about trauma and what that looks like, and grief, what that looks like, it can really help change the perspective that you have on self-care. I don't want it to just be something that is being thrown at you, like take care of yourself, go running, go, eat healthy, watch TV. Like, no, I don't want it to just be that. I want it to be something that you truly understand why it's important, because I think that that will make all the difference. And so I found several definitions on trauma, and so I want to just share them with you. I think that all of them at the core are pretty similar, even though they do focus on different things. And so the first one that I want to share with you is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration definition of trauma. And this was one of the ones that I liked the most. And so this definition, it says, it's from an event. It's trauma resulting from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. And so this definition, I feel like it captivates all of it. It's an event or series of events that produce this threat or perceived threat into our lives, our well-being. So that's one of the ones that I really liked. And I hope that you're starting to see the connections as to how this pandemic is something that is traumatic. It's something that is threatening either our livelihood, or we perceive that it's threatening our livelihood, even if we're in our homes, or it's that perceived threat of those that we love too. So some other definitions, trauma is when threat overwhelms an individual's adaptive, internal, or external coping resources. So this one throws in our ability to cope with what's being presented in our lives. Events or circumstances that are experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. And the next one is damage to the psyche that occurs after a severely distressing event. So what all of these definitions of trauma have in common is that there is an event, there is something that happens that it's either causing our life to feel like it's threatened, or we perceive that it's threatening our life. And the stress that is causing exceeds our ability to cope. That's what I feel that trauma is. And that's why I feel that everything that is happening right now is really rooted in this definition of trauma. And so along with that, what I think it's important for us to realize is that this happened fairly quickly. I think a lot of us are still in the shock of it all. A lot of us are still in the denial of it all. I think that's why a lot of people perhaps are not taking the proper precautions, because they're in denial. And then some people are like, this is real, like this is what we need to do to be safe. And then they're really hyper vigilant and making sure that they're doing everything that they can to avoid being any exposure or risk. And to be honest, I think that what is the hardest for us to accept is that we need to be vulnerable during this time, and we need to reach out to others, and we need to connect with others. I don't think that we're doing that enough. I think that, like I mentioned before, it's something that we were pushed into. It's something that didn't stop, right? Like, we figured out how to work from home. We figured out how to do family life and do this and do that. And it was overwhelming, and it was a lot, and it exceeded our ability to cope. And we kept running with it. And I don't think that we've really stopped running. We haven't stopped running. And so I feel that we have to really open up and be vulnerable with our support system and talk about these things, because we can't just continue pretending that we have it under control and that we are so confident that we're doing it right, because we're figuring it out. And it's okay to admit that. And so one of the things that is important to know is that those individuals in our family, even in our lives, who've had trauma experiences in the past, and whatever those trauma experiences have looked like, they are at a higher risk of having this pandemic be something that causes those trauma triggers to come up again. Because what happens with trauma is that, like I mentioned, it's a threat or a perceived threat. So when we're threatened, what is it that's vulnerable? What is it that's exposed? What is it that's like on the line? Our safety, right? And so when you've had those traumatic experiences of something threatening your life, threatening your safety, like, those feelings are the same regardless of what it is. And so people who have a history of being exposed to trauma or a history of trauma themselves, or even mental health conditions, are at a higher risk of having these adverse effects of trauma. And so the reason that it's important for you to know this is because you need to be monitoring your own life, but at the same time, it's really good for you to monitor the life of others in your life. If the just sharing this information with others and just being more aware, because this pandemic impacts children differently than it does adults. And when these things come into play, like a history of trauma or mental health, that's also a factor that creates a different reaction, or could potentially create a different response to trauma. And so what I wanted to share with you is that you really need to be aware of how this is impacting you, and then take the proper steps to make sure that you are caring for yourself in the best way. So I'll give you some examples. I guess because trauma and mental health is something that I am really passionate about, I was very self-aware as it was happening, as things were changing, as we were learning that, more and more people here were being impacted by COVID-19. And as we were hearing like the press conferences saying how we were going to have like a new lifestyle, a new way of life. And I remember those words so clearly. I also remember driving to work one day, and this was around the time when they had closed down the tolls where you have to pay. They only had the Easy Tag open. And I remember that I was driving past, I have an Easy Tag, so I was driving past it, and I remember seeing the 3X's on like where it was closed. And I don't know why, like that image is like stuck in my head. And I remember shopping for like preparing for us to go into quarantine, right? And I remember going through the aisles, and like the images of empty shelves is in my head. The images of like all the toilet paper being gone. Toilet paper, why toilet paper? But that's in my head. I remember the feeling I would get every time that we would get more news, whenever they were going to close down the restaurants and the bars. Like that was another time when I felt like, I just remember like that feeling of like I have to hold my breath because like there's a heavy pit in my stomach, right? And so to me, those are things that I need to be aware of, because this situation is what's causing that. It's not that there's something wrong with me. It's not that any of those things. It's that when a perceived threat, when a live threat, when an event is occurring, when a pandemic is occurring, we are allowed to have a response, a reaction. That's the way our brain was designed. And so I am very much aware, and I share those things with you because I'm sure that there's things in your life too that have been engraved in your brain and that are there. And so long term, I don't foresee that, the visions of the 3X's that, were on the Easy Tag toll is going to impact me long term. I think it's going to be a memory, but that's why protective factors are so important. And so that's what I want to talk to you about. There's the pandemic. It's changing our lives. There's these components of trauma. There's the grief of the losses that we're having, and we don't know for how long this is going to have. And so not only the loss of maybe like a family member or a loved one, the risk to your health. There's the grief of like milestones that perhaps you're not getting to celebrate. There's the fact that it's sad that we're not able to hug or to go visit, the people that we love. That's exactly what happened, recently when it was my mom's birthday and we could just drive by her home. I remember that right after that, like I just broke down crying. Because it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's hard to be distant from your loved ones. And so all of that is grief, and I'll probably do another video on grief, just because I want to make sure that I leave you with specific things that you can do that speak to caring for yourself, that speak to being kind to yourself. And so the first thing I want you to know is that it's important to acknowledge what you're feeling. Acknowledge this is a pandemic. Acknowledge that no one knows how to do this. We're all figuring it out together. And being aware of your emotions. Being aware of your emotions and sharing them with someone. Making sure that you have at least one person. I would hope for a minimum of 3 people that you can call or something, but at least one person who you feel safe sharing these feelings with. It's important that we're kind to ourselves, that we realize that sometimes we may not be able to explain what we're feeling or why we're feeling it, but that we still deserve to be kind to ourselves. We still deserve that no matter what, because we're human and we're going through this, right? It's important to have boundaries. And what that means is making sure that you're not afraid to speak up, even if it's to a family member, about keeping yourself safe, keeping your family safe. Everyone has different views and everyone is handling this in different ways, but you staying true to making sure that you're doing what is right in your heart, what you know is right to protecting your family. It's important to have those boundaries in regards to the exposure that you have to TV, to cell phone, like news, like when you're on your cell phone, on social media. And that's something that, I'm a visual learner. So if I see things, they stay in my head. And like I mentioned before, like even things that I don't think are going to impact me, they stay in my head. And so I try to limit my exposure to TV, like, a lot, because to me, I know what I have to do and I'll check in, but I have designated times to check in and get caught up on the news. So you finding out what's right for you in regards to exposure. Making sure that you are finding those things that you enjoy, things that you can do to unwind. That's where the self-care comes in. You're caring for your body in your sleep habits, in your eating habits, in your exercise, making sure that you are really taking care of your body, because like I mentioned, this is something that is impacting us emotionally, but can also impact us physically. That you're finding ways to connect with others, that you are FaceTiming your loved ones, that you are texting, that you're like reaching out and still maintaining those connections, because that's how we get through this. We get through it together. And so staying in the present, making sure that you're not going too far into the future and worrying about the future, that you're not stuck in the past, that you really are trying to do what you can now, focusing on the things that you can control and letting go of those things that you can't. Making sure that you monitor your emotions, that you're keeping them in check, your thoughts too. And then doing, whatever is right for you to keep that hope alive. You need to keep hope. This is something that will pass. It's not going to be going on forever. And making sure that you're feeding your spirit, that you're feeding your mind and your body and everything about you with something positive. That you're feeding that with your faith. That you're feeding that with what you know to be true. And that you're standing firm in that. Because you know that we have hope. And that this is something that, yes, it's big. And yes, it's altered our way of living and our way of doing everything, right? But at the same time, making sure that you're able to find the blessings in this time. That you're able to find what little things we probably have been ignoring for too long and that deserve our attention. And that you stand strong in that. And so I just want you to know that this is something that is big and you're allowed to be human. Here is your permission for you to be human, for you to feel, for you to reach out and connect. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.